One strike away. That's how close the Boston Red Sox were to ending 68 years of heartbreak. One strike away from their first World Series championship since 1918. One strike away from finally silencing the ghosts of Babe Ruth and the curse of the Bambino. Heartbreak after heartbreak after heartbreak. But now, finally, the curse was about to end. Instead, what happened next became the most painful collapse in baseball history. A nightmare that would haunt New England for another 18 years. A sequence of events so improbable, so devastating, that it seemed scripted by cruel fate itself. The win probability calculators would later show that the Red Sox had reached 99% certainty of victory. 99%. The highest any team had ever achieved before losing. A statistical impossibility that somehow became reality. This is the story of the 1986 Boston Red Sox, a team that had everything, a team that should have won it all, a team that found a way to lose when losing seemed impossible. The 1986 Red Sox were built to end the drought. Roger Clemens was just 23 years old and already the most dominant pitcher in baseball at Fenway Park, setting a major league record that had stood for over a century. 20 strikeouts in a 9-inning game. No pitcher had ever done that before. By season's end, Clemens had compiled a 24-4 record with a 2.48 earned run average. He became the first starting pitcher since Vida Blue in 1971 to win both the Cy Young Award and the Most Valuable Player Award in the same season. The Rocket, as he was called, made hitters look helpless. His fastball exploded out of his hand. His breaking ball buckled knees. He was the kind of pitcher who made you believe championships were possible. The lineup was loaded with veterans who knew how to win. Wade Boggs was the best pure hitter in baseball, winning his third consecutive batting title with a .320 mark. Jim Rice, the powerful left fielder, drove in over 100 runs for the 8th time in his career. Dwight Evans brought Gold Glove defense and clutch hitting from right field. Don Baylor, acquired from the New York Yankees, added 31 home runs and the kind of veteran presence that teams need in October. Bill Buckner was 36 years old but still dangerous. He drove in 102 runs despite playing through chronic ankle pain so severe he needed 9 cortisone shots just to get through the season. His left ankle had never fully recovered from an injury suffered in 1975 with the Dodgers. He limped to first base. He limped to the plate. He limped everywhere, but he refused to stop playing. Manager John McNamara called Buckner the toughest player he'd ever seen. Like a rodeo cowboy, McNamara said, limping off to his pickup truck, throwing his saddle in the back, and driving off to his next performance. Rich Gedman was an all-star catcher from Worcester, Massachusetts, a hometown kid living his dream behind the plate for the Red Sox. He had caught Clemens's 20-strikeout masterpiece. He had become the defensive anchor the pitching staff trusted. Bruce Hurst was the unsung hero of the rotation, a crafty left-hander who didn't overpower hitters, but always seemed to find a way to get outs when it mattered most. Oil Can Boyd, the eccentric right-hander from Mississippi, won 16 games and brought a personality the clubhouse couldn't ignore. The Red Sox won 95 games and captured the American League East by 5.5 games over their hated rivals, the New York Yankees. It was the first time since 1904 that the Red Sox and Yankees finished first and second in the standings. Everything was pointing toward destiny. Everything was pointing toward the end of the curse. But first, they had to survive California. The American League Championship Series against the California Angels nearly ended the dream before it truly began. The Angels were a dangerous team led by Reggie Jackson, who knew all about October heroics. They had never been to a World Series in their 25-year history. They were hungry. Boston won Game 1 at Fenway. California took Game 2. Then the series shifted to Anaheim, where the Angels dominated. They won Game 3. They won Game 4. Suddenly, the Red Sox were down 3 games to 1. One more loss and their season was over. The curse would claim another victim. Game 5 at Anaheim Stadium became one of the most dramatic games in baseball history. It became a story of miracles and misery that would foreshadow everything to come. The Angels led 5-2 entering the 9th inning. Their closer, Donnie Moore, was on the mound. 3 outs from their first World Series appearance ever. The Angels' dugout was already celebrating. Champagne was being prepared in their clubhouse. Bill Buckner led off with a single. Don Baylor crushed a 2-run homer to cut the lead to 5-4. The Angels' faithful shifted nervously in their seats. But Moore got the next 2 outs. 2 outs, 1 strike away from the pennant. Dave Henderson, a mid-season acquisition from Seattle, stepped to the plate. He had already made a costly error earlier in the series, misjudging a fly ball that led to an Angels run. He was not a star. He was a journeyman outfielder who had bounced between teams. The count went to 2-2. 1 strike away, Moore threw, Henderson swung, the ball sailed over the left field fence. 2 runs scored. The Red Sox led 6-5. Henderson screamed as he rounded the bases. The Angels' dugout went silent. The crowd of over 64,000 sat in stunned disbelief. The Angels tied it in the bottom of the 9th, but their spirit was broken. Donnie Moore, who gave up the home run, would never be the same. He would be haunted by that pitch for the rest of his life. Henderson delivered a sacrifice fly in the 11th inning to win the game. The Red Sox dominated games 6 and 7 at Fenway, winning by a combined 13 runs. The Angels were destroyed. The Red Sox were American League champions for the first time since 1975. Dave Henderson was the hero. The Red Sox had survived the impossible. They had come back from the dead. They had proven that destiny was on their side. Now they would face the New York Mets for the championship. The Mets had won 108 games, the most in baseball. They had finished 21.5 games ahead of their closest competition. They were considered one of the best teams in National League history. But the Red Sox had Clemens. They had momentum. They had Henderson's magic. They had already survived one impossible situation. What was one more? The World Series opened at Shea Stadium in New York, and the Red Sox immediately made a statement. Bruce Hurst was magnificent in Game 1. He threw 8 innings of 4-hit shutout baseball, baffling the powerful Mets lineup with his looping curveball and pinpoint control. The Mets had scored runs in bunches all season. They had intimidated opponents with their swagger and their bats. But Hurst made them look ordinary. The Red Sox won 1-0 on an unearned run in the 7th inning. Tim Teufel, the Mets' second baseman, let a Rich Gedman ground ball go through his legs. Sound familiar? Jim Rice scored from second. It was enough. The road team had won. In hostile territory, against the best team in baseball, against a team that had not lost a series at home all year. Game 2 was supposed to be a classic pitching matchup. Clemens versus Dwight Gooden, the Rocket versus Dr. K, the 2 young phenoms, the 2 best pitchers in their respective leagues. The matchup everyone wanted. Neither pitcher was sharp. Clemens lasted only 5 innings. Gooden was knocked out even earlier, but the Red Sox lineup exploded. They collected 18 hits. Dave Henderson homered again. Dwight Evans drove in 3 runs. The final score was 9-3. Boston led 2 games to none. The Mets were reeling. Their vaunted pitching staff had been shelled. Their home field advantage was gone. The Red Sox were heading back to Fenway Park with a chance to take a stranglehold on the series. In the history of baseball, teams that took 2-0 leads in the World Series had won 86% of the time. The curse of the Bambino looked ready to die. But the Mets refused to go quietly. Game 3 started with disaster. Lenny Dykstra crushed a leadoff home run off Oil Can Boyd. The Mets scored 4 runs in the first inning and never looked back. They won 7-1. Game 4 belonged to Gary Carter. The Mets catcher hit 2 home runs over the Green Monster. New York won 6-2. The series was tied. Game 5 went back to Hurst, and once again the left-hander delivered. He pitched a complete game, scattering 10 hits, keeping the Mets off balance with his curveball and changeup. The Red Sox won 4-2 and took a 3-2 series lead. They were heading back to New York, needing just one win in 2 games to claim the championship. Bruce Hurst was already being discussed as the likely World Series most valuable player. The champagne was being put on ice. The trophy was being polished. One win, that's all they needed, just one win in 2 chances. The Red Sox had never been this close, not since 1918. 68 years of waiting, 68 years of heartbreak, all of it about to end. What could possibly go wrong? Game 6 of the 1986 World Series began on Saturday night, October 25th, at Shea Stadium. The temperature was cool. The crowd of over 55,000 was desperate, knowing their Mets were facing elimination. Roger Clemens took the mound for Boston. Bob Ojeda, a former Red Sox pitcher, started for New York. From the very first inning, the Red Sox seemed in control. They scored in the first on a double by Dwight Evans. They scored again in the second on a single by Marty Barrett. After 2 innings, it was 2-0 Boston. Clemens was dominant. He threw a no-hitter through 4 innings. He struck out 8 Mets. His fastball was exploding, and his curveball was unhittable. The championship seemed within reach, but the Mets were not done. In the 5th inning, Darryl Strawberry walked and stole second. Ray Knight singled him home. Mookie Wilson singled to put runners on the corners. A double play scored another run. Suddenly, it was 2-2. The game settled into a tense battle. Neither team could break through. The pitchers dominated. The tension built with every pitch. In the 7th inning, the Red Sox finally broke the tie. Marty Barrett scored on an RBI groundout from Dwight Evans after a Mets error put runners on the corners. Boston led 3-2, but they could not add on. Jim Rice was thrown out at the plate, trying to score on a Rich Gedman single. Mookie Wilson, with his famously weak arm, made a perfect throw to catcher Gary Carter, who tagged Rice out. An insurance run died at home plate. Then came the 8th inning, and the first controversy that would define this game. Roger Clemens had thrown 134 pitches through 7 innings. He had been brilliant. But manager John McNamara decided to pinch hit for him. The decision sparked immediate debate. Some said Clemens had a blister on his pitching finger and could not continue. Clemens has always maintained he wanted to stay in the game. McNamara later said Clemens begged out, telling the manager after the 7th inning that he could not pitch anymore. Years later, McNamara's wife Ellen defended her husband's version, saying Roger asked out of the game, and when Roger told him he wanted to come out, John said, "You've got to be kidding me." The truth may never be known. What is known is that Clemens left the game with a 3-2 lead, and the Red Sox bullpen was about to face the heart of the Mets order. Calvin Schiraldi entered the game to pitch the 8th inning. He was a rookie, called up from the minor leagues in late July. He had just 9 saves during the regular season. He was not the closer. Bob Stanley, with 16 saves, was the closer, but McNamara chose Schiraldi. The decision nearly backfired immediately. Schiraldi loaded the bases with nobody out. The Mets were threatening to blow the game open. But somehow, he escaped. Gary Carter hit a sacrifice fly to tie the game, but that was all. The bases were loaded with nobody out, and the Mets only scored 1 run. The game was tied 3-3. It would go to extra innings. In the top of the 10th inning, the Red Sox offense came alive. Dave Henderson led off against Rick Aguilera. On the second pitch, Henderson crushed a home run to left field. The Red Sox led 4-3. Henderson, the hero of the American League Championship Series, had done it again. The championship was within reach. But Boston was not done. Wade Boggs doubled. Marty Barrett singled him home. It was 5-3. The Red Sox had a 2-run lead with 3 outs to go. 3 outs. That's all they needed. 3 outs and 68 years of heartbreak would be over. Calvin Schiraldi came back to the mound to close it out. The first batter was Wally Backman. He lifted a fly ball to left field. Jim Rice caught it. 1 out. The second batter was Keith Hernandez, the Mets' best hitter. He lifted a fly ball to center field. Dave Henderson caught it. 2 outs. The Red Sox dugout was celebrating. Players were hugging. Coaches were shaking hands. The champagne, on loan from the Mets, was being iced in the Boston clubhouse. Bob Costas, the NBC broadcaster, was already positioned for the post-game celebration. The scoreboard at Shea Stadium briefly flashed a message: "Congratulations, Boston Red Sox, 1986 world champions, 1 out away, 1 out from glory." Gary Carter stepped to the plate. Schiraldi got ahead, no balls and 2 strikes. He was 1 strike away from the championship, 1 strike from immortality. Carter fouled off pitches. He worked the count. Then he lined a single to left field. The tying run was at the plate, but there were still 2 outs, still just 1 out needed. Kevin Mitchell pinch hit for Aguilera. He was a rookie from San Diego. He had been in the Mets clubhouse, already changed into his street clothes when Carter got the hit. He had to scramble back into uniform. Mitchell singled to center. Carter went to second. The tying run was now in scoring position, but still 2 outs. Ray Knight came to the plate. He had already driven in the tying run in the 5th inning. He was dangerous. Schiraldi got ahead, no balls and 2 strikes, 1 strike away again. Knight fouled off pitches. He battled. He stayed alive. Then he lined a single to center field. Carter scored. Mitchell went to third. It was 5-4, still 2 outs. But the tying run was 90 feet away. John McNamara walked to the mound. He was taking Schiraldi out. He was bringing in Bob Stanley, the veteran closer who had been the closer all season. Mookie Wilson stepped into the batter's box. Bob Stanley versus Mookie Wilson. The World Series on the line. 2 outs. Runner on third. Tying run 90 feet away. Stanley threw. Wilson fouled it off. Strike 1. Stanley threw again. Ball 1, ball 2. The count was 2-1. Stanley threw. Wilson fouled it off. 2-2. Stanley threw again. Wilson fouled it back. Still 2-2. Stanley threw again. Wilson fouled it off his foot. Still 2-2. The at-bat stretched on. Wilson kept fouling pitches back. He would not give in. He would not make an out. On the 7th pitch of the at-bat, Stanley came inside, way inside. The ball darted toward Wilson's body. Wilson jumped back to avoid being hit. Catcher Rich Gedman reached for the ball, but it was too far inside. He could not get his glove on it. The ball rolled to the backstop. Wild pitch. Kevin Mitchell sprinted home from third base. He scored standing up. The game was tied, 5-5. The Red Sox had been 1 strike away, twice, and now the game was tied, but they still had 2 outs. They could still get out of the inning. They could still win in the 11th. Mookie Wilson was still at the plate. Ray Knight was now on second base, the winning run in scoring position. Stanley threw again. Wilson fouled it off. Stanley threw again. Wilson fouled it off. On the 10th pitch of the at-bat, Wilson made contact. He hit a slow roller up the first baseline, a routine ground ball to Bill Buckner. Buckner moved to his right. He bent down to field the ball, and then the ball went through his legs. It rolled between his ankles and into right field. Knight rounded third and scored easily. The Mets had won, 6-5. Shea Stadium exploded. The Red Sox had been 1 strike away, 1 out away, 1 routine ground ball away, and they lost. The image of Bill Buckner bending down and the ball rolling through his legs became the defining moment of the 1986 World Series. It became one of the most replayed moments in sports history, shorthand for failure, for choking, for the cruelty of fate. But blaming Buckner alone is unfair. It ignores everything that happened before the ball reached his glove. It ignores the reality of what occurred that night. Start with Roger Clemens leaving the game after 7 innings with a 1-run lead. Whether he asked out or was pulled, the result was the same. The best pitcher in baseball, the MVP and Cy Young Award winner, was not on the mound when the game was decided. That was a managerial choice. That was a strategic decision, and it failed. Move to Calvin Schiraldi, who gave up 3 consecutive singles with 2 outs and nobody on base. He had the championship in his hands, 1 out away, twice, and he could not finish it. The rookie, who should not have been closing in the first place, could not handle the pressure. Consider Bob Stanley's wild pitch, which tied the game before Buckner ever touched a baseball in the 10th inning. Statistical analysis later showed the wild pitch had a greater impact on the outcome than Buckner's error. The wild pitch is what tied the game. Buckner's error only prevented extra innings. Ask why Rich Gedman did not block the wild pitch. He reached for the ball instead of moving his body in front of it. Catchers are taught from Little League to block pitches in the dirt with their bodies. Gedman did not. Some said he expected a sinker and Stanley threw a fastball. Some said there was a miscommunication. Either way, the ball got past him. Kevin Mitchell scored. The game was tied. Then question why Buckner was even on the field. This is perhaps the most damning indictment of John McNamara's management. In all 7 Red Sox victories that October, McNamara had replaced Buckner with Dave Stapleton for defensive purposes in the late innings. Every single time, Stapleton was on the roster specifically for this purpose. He was a capable defender who could handle first base. Buckner's ankles were destroyed. He had received 9 cortisone shots just to get through the season. He could barely move laterally. He wore special high-top cleats, the first major leaguer ever to do so, just to stabilize his damaged joints. But in Game 6, with the championship on the line, with the World Series about to be clinched, McNamara left Buckner in. Later, he said he wanted Buckner to be on the field for the final out. He wanted to reward the veteran for his gritty season. He wanted the man who had driven in over 100 runs to be there when the celebration started. It was a sentimental decision. It was an emotional decision. And it backfired catastrophically. And there is one more factor that gets overlooked, one more piece of context that history has forgotten. Mookie Wilson was fast, very fast. He had stolen over 50 bases in his prime. Even at the end of the season, he could fly down the line. Even if Buckner had fielded the ball cleanly, he would have had to beat Wilson to the bag. Think about that. Bill Buckner, hobbled by 9 cortisone shots, moving on ankles that had no business being on a baseball field. Mookie Wilson, one of the fastest men in baseball, running on adrenaline and desperation with the World Series on the line. Several eyewitnesses, including Wilson himself, said after the game that he might have beaten Buckner to first base anyway. The game might still have been tied. The nightmare might have continued regardless. But none of that matters to history. History remembers the ball going through Buckner's legs. History remembers the image, frozen in time, of a broken man watching a broken play. After the game, Buckner faced the media with dignity. "I can't remember the last time I missed a ball like that," he said, "but I'll remember this one." He would remember it for the rest of his life. And so would everyone else. There was still Game 7. The Red Sox still had a chance. Rain postponed the game by 1 day, pushing it from Sunday to Monday night. The extra day should have helped Boston recover from the emotional devastation of Game 6. Manager McNamara used the rainout to make a pitching change. Oil Can Boyd had been scheduled to start, but the extra day allowed Bruce Hurst to pitch on 3 days' rest instead. There was just one problem with Boyd. According to McNamara and pitching coach Bill Fisher, Boyd was in no condition to pitch anyway. They found him drunk. Fisher locked him in the manager's office for the entire game to keep him away from the team. Boyd later admitted in his autobiography that he had used crack cocaine every day of the 1986 season. He admitted being high on marijuana in every baseball game from Little League through college. The 1986 Red Sox had a pitcher who couldn't pitch Game 7 because he was too intoxicated to function. Hurst took the mound and the Red Sox came out swinging. Dwight Evans homered in the second inning. Rich Gedman followed with another home run. Wade Boggs singled in Dave Henderson. It was Boston, 3-0, after 2 innings. The ghosts of Game 6 seemed exorcised. Hurst was cruising, the Mets looked defeated. The championship was within reach again. But Hurst couldn't hold the lead. In the 6th inning, the Mets finally got to him. Lee Mazzilli singled, Mookie Wilson singled. Keith Hernandez delivered a 2-run single to cut the lead to 3-2. Gary Carter hit a sacrifice fly to tie it. 3-3. The Red Sox lead was gone. Again, Calvin Schiraldi, the GOAT of Game 6, was brought in to pitch the 7th inning. Ray Knight greeted him with a home run. The Mets led 4-3. Schiraldi allowed another run before being pulled. The Mets tacked on 2 more in the 8th on a Darryl Strawberry home run and an RBI single from pitcher Jesse Orosco. The final score was 8-5. The New York Mets were World Series champions. The Red Sox had led 3 games to 2. They had led Game 6 5-3 with 2 outs and nobody on in the 10th inning. They had led Game 7 3-0 after 2 innings, and they lost. The aftermath was brutal. Bill Buckner received death threats. Fans heckled him mercilessly at Fenway Park, the stadium where he had driven in over 100 runs that season. His children were bullied at school. His family was tormented. The word Buckner became slang for a booted ground ball. Buckner was released by the Red Sox the following July, despite batting .273 at the time. He signed with the Angels, then the Royals, then returned to Boston for a brief stint in 1990. Eventually he moved his family to Idaho, where nobody cared about baseball and nobody remembered Game 6. The Red Sox would not win another World Series until 2004. 18 more years of heartbreak and of the curse. Buckner was not fully embraced by Boston again until 2008. The Red Sox, having finally won championships in 2004 and 2007, invited him to throw out the first pitch on opening day. He received a 2-minute standing ovation from the Fenway faithful. Buckner said afterward that he really had to forgive, not the fans of Boston per se, but in his heart he had to forgive the media for what they put him and his family through. Buckner died on May 27, 2019 at the age of 69 after a long battle with Lewy body dementia. He was remembered as a gamer, a battler, a man who played through pain that would have sidelined lesser athletes. He accumulated over 2,700 hits in his career. He won a batting title. He was an all-star, but to too many people, he was the man who let the ball go through his legs. The blame for 1986 does not belong to Bill Buckner alone. It belongs to an entire organization that found ways to fail when success seemed guaranteed. Roger Clemens for leaving the game, whether by choice or circumstance. John McNamara for removing his best pitcher, for pinch hitting with a rookie instead of a veteran, for leaving an injured first baseman on the field. Calvin Schiraldi for giving up 3 consecutive hits with 2 outs and the championship in his hands. Bob Stanley for throwing a wild pitch that tied the game before Buckner ever touched the ball. Rich Gedman for failing to block the wild pitch, and for making a throwing error in the 9th inning that put runners in scoring position. Oil Can Boyd for being too intoxicated to pitch Game 7. The entire team for leaving 14 runners on base in Game 6, for failing to add insurance runs when they had chances, for squandering a 3-0 lead in Game 7. It was not one error. It was a cascade of failures. A perfect storm of mistakes and misfortune that added up to the most painful loss in baseball history. Bob Stanley summed it up best after Game 6. "People always remember the last thing that happened," he said. "They do not remember the other parts of the game, that we left 14 men on base." He was right. People remember Buckner. They forget everything else. The 1986 Boston Red Sox had the best pitcher in baseball. They had a lineup full of all-stars and future Hall of Famers. They had momentum, experience, and 68 years of pent-up desire pushing them forward. They had a 2-run lead with 2 outs and nobody on in the 10th inning of a World Series game that would have given them the championship. They were 1 strike away, twice, and they lost. Some called it the curse of the Bambino. The ghost of Babe Ruth, sold to the Yankees in 1920, reaching from beyond the grave to torment Red Sox fans for generations. Others called it bad luck, a wild pitch, a slow roller, a broken ankle that could not bend fast enough. But maybe it was something simpler. Maybe it was just baseball. A game where anything can happen. A game where the best team does not always win. A game where 1 ground ball can change history. The Red Sox would eventually break the curse. In 2004, they came back from 3-0 against the Yankees in the American League Championship Series and swept the Cardinals in the World Series. They won again in 2007, 2013, and 2018. But 1986 can never be erased. It lives in highlight reels and documentaries. It lives in the nightmares of fans who watched it happen. It lives in the image of Bill Buckner, bent over at first base, the ball rolling through his legs and into history. 1 strike away. That is how close they were. Like and subscribe for more baseball content. Until next time.